What is up, everybody? I'm Ryan Thomas. Welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I am your host. Once again, I bring you breaking mixed martial arts news. Over the course of my time watching the Bills game, I heard from a very valid source that Chael Sonnen would be returning to the octagon. I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see him come back. I text the source, say, who's he fighting? And he says, well, it's not going to be anybody in the UFC. I'm like, what? The UFC making like a dream matchup? Somebody they're bringing from another promotion? Or, is he fighting in another promotion? Yes. The answer was yes. He will be fighting in another promotion. Chael Sonnen has inked a multi-year, multi-fight contract with Bellator. Bellator is obviously the UFC's biggest competitor, and this is a shocking turn of events for Chael Sonnen, a guy that was a true UFC ride-or-die type fighter, a guy that has headlined many of the UFC's biggest events in the history of the company, a huge drawing power for the UFC, a guy that really transcended mixed martial arts and making big gates and performing at a high level in big fights, being that draw, being the guy that, being kind of like the Conor McGregor before Conor McGregor, and he really enhanced Anderson Silva's career, who is arguably the greatest of all time. And Anderson Silva, without Chael Sonnen, Anderson Silva's career would not really be what it is, just because he played the role of the foe so well. And now Chael Sonnen has taken some time off. He hasn't fought in almost 3 years. His last appearance was I believe UFC 167, which was back in November 2013. That event was headlined by George St. Pierre at the time, who was at the time he was the welterweight champion against Johnny Hendricks. That was the last time GSP has also fought inside the octagon. So that was a fight. Chael Sonnen went up against Rashad Evans, and he lost in pretty quick fashion. I believe it was in the first round, maybe early second round. I think it was the first round at the light heavyweight division, obviously. And then there was the targeted bout between Chael and Wanderlei Silva. And immediately when I had heard that Chael Sonnen would be going to Bellator, I thought to myself, well, maybe he wanted to go to Bellator because Wanderlei Silva signed with Bellator a few months back. Maybe he just wants that fight so bad because that was a real big fight that was about to happen in the UFC. Both tested positive for different substances. Actually, Chael was the one that tested positive for substances, but Wanderlei was presumed to have tested positive because he would not take the USADA mandatory drug test, which is, a law that was brought about by, an organization, I should say, that was brought in by the UFC to test the athletes and the fighters. Wanderlei said, no, I'm not going to take that drug test. And they said, well, you're gone. You're suspended. So he served his suspension, and Bellator signed him along the way. So he should be back, I heard, July of 2017. So maybe Chael wants that fight. I thought of other matchups, too, for Chael Sonnen along the way. It depends on what he wants to do, but, Tito Ortiz is an option that would be an interesting fight. Tito Ortiz and Chael Sonnen never fought. Tito was one of the biggest draws that the UFC ever had. Chael Sonnen is obviously, as I said earlier, one of the biggest draws that the UFC has ever had. So to have that fight, that would be interesting. Obviously, Fedor Emelianenko, guy that recently just came over from the UFC, would be Rory MacDonald. Rory MacDonald's made remarks about being a middleweight fighter in the Bellator organization, and Chael Sonnen said he would be willing to fight in as many as 3 weight divisions, whether that be middleweight, light heavyweight, or maybe even heavyweight, or maybe like a catchweight at between welterweight and middleweight. Very interesting stuff. Obviously he finds, himself in a good position of getting intriguing matchups. And I imagine that with the signing of Rory MacDonald and the signing of Chael Sonnen, that, at the time of Rory MacDonald going to Bellator, I thought Rory is probably the highest paid Bellator fighter. But now that honor has to go to Chael Sonnen, just because of the fact that even though he is 39, he is Chael Sonnen, and he did a lot for the sport of mixed martial arts in terms of drawing power and bringing new fan appeal towards the sport of MMA. And in a high-profile fight, 2 fights, he fought Anderson Silva, he fought John Jones, he's fought practically everyone, and he's had like 3 different levels of his career, 3 different stints, a career within a career, so to speak, where he had his first run in the UFC, which was, he came in with high expectations. He didn't really meet those expectations. Then he was released. Then he had his title, contention run in the WEC versus Paulo Filho. And then he came back to the UFC, went on a complete tear at middleweight, beat Nate Marquardt and Yushin Okami, really went through the who's who at the middleweight division to get to Anderson Silva, talked all the crap he needed to talk in order to get that fight, and then he got the fight. Then he talked even more stuff, more smack about Anderson Silva, saying that he was going to put him on his back for 25 minutes and beat him to a pulp, and he pretty much did, had it not been for the last minute and 30 seconds of that fight where, Anderson wrapped his legs over his head, pulled on the arm, put him in an arm triangle, and, won the fight. Then the rematch was the most highly anticipated rematch probably in UFC history to date, even higher than Nate and Conor, because Anderson was, one of the greatest of all time, and he was pushed to the max by a guy that many people didn't think he could do what he was saying he was going to do. And that was actually for a UFC title. That wasn't necessarily just a grudge match like it was with Conor and Nate. This was actually for a belt, and it was actually for the number 1 pound-for-pound spot in the sport. So, that had a lot of drawing power to it. It was UFC 148, and Tito Ortiz was on the co-main event of that card when he fought Forrest Griffin. So to put Tito Ortiz versus Chael Sonnen together, that would be a huge fight for Bellator, and it would actually be a huge fight for MMA, even though Chael and Tito aren't what they once were. There would be a lot of people that would still want to see that fight, myself included. So very interesting. I am shocked that Chael would go this route, that he would take this opportunity. I never thought he would compete in another organization but the UFC, and to see him go to Bellator, it really puts in perspective the changing dynamic that free agency in mixed martial arts is only just begun. It's really on the cusp of being something interesting, and Bellator will get bigger if they keep making moves like this. I really slammed them in a column of mine on My Fantasy Sports Talk, right around the Kimbo Slice Dada 5000 fight. God rest his soul, Kimbo Slice. God rest in peace. May he rest in peace. God bless him. But that sort of business was more generated towards just generating fans. It wasn't really so fans would watch his fights and think this is high level mixed martial arts, because even everyone and their grandma knew that Kimbo Slice wasn't a high level mixed martial artist. He was a brawler, and he was an internet sensation who brought a lot of attention to the sport. And that wasn't really high-level mixed martial arts. Bellator just needed that guy to be a draw. Now they're bringing in the guys that are the high-level mixed martial artists, like Rory McDonald and Benson Henderson. Now Chael Sonnen. So those are 3 guys that, in the UFC, they were huge names. And now Bellator's bringing them in. They're guys that kind of fell short on hard times. Rory McDonald fought Robbie Lawler twice, came on the losing end twice. Chael Sonnen really didn't have, as I started thinking about it, he lost to Anderson, lost to John Jones, so he was really only going to fight like legendary matchups in the UFC if he were to come back to the UFC. But the UFC is a lot, younger of a roster now than it used to, and then it did then. Most of the guys of Chael Sonnen's era are gone, because obviously Chael Sonnen's 39. So the guys that are left over from that era are in Bellator. So Chael Sonnen can go there, find matchups within that organization, and get paid, because that's really what it's all about. Making as much money as humanly possible, and Chael Sonnen loves to do that. So Another, topic of discussion that I thought within this, Chael Sonnen did recently lose his daughter. She was practically, I don't even think she was a year old yet, maybe 2. She had some sort of rare disease when she was born. So, I think, just from what I read, it was kept very private, as anyone would think it would be. He didn't even really talk about it on this podcast, on his You're Welcome podcast, which is hilarious. But, maybe he is thinking to himself, I got this stuff inside me now. I've, had this tragedy. Maybe he just wants to let some stuff out, and his way of doing that would be to get into the cage and punch somebody in the head, or slam somebody with a double leg. So, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I'm happy for the guy. I think it's a very interesting move. I love Chael Sonnen. I loved when he was around in the UFC. I thought he was a real entertaining fighter, real entertaining guy in and out of the cage. And I'm glad that he is back, whether it's in the UFC or not. I'm entertained by him, no matter what avenue it's in. Really enjoyed his work as a commentator on World Series of Fighting. I think he's going to continue that. His opportunities are limitless, but now he has the opportunity to go into Bellator and make some money and get good matchups. So good for you, Chael Sonnen. If I were to pick a matchup for Chael Sonnen, I would say that the Vanderlei Silva matchup would be too good to make. It would be a real great sell by Bellator to put that one together, because that one was supposed to be a fight that was going to be in the UFC, that was supposed to happen in the UFC for a long time, probably 3-4 years, and it did not happen. So Bellator should take advantage of that principle. It's a fight that it did not happen in the UFC. The first time it would happen would be in Bellator. And if they were to put it on national television, that would be even better. The ratings would be through the roof. Spike TV is a network that people still watch. It's a fight fan network. Spike had that notoriety before, being that they were with the UFC for a long time. And the UFC went to Fox Sports. So, Bellator is has the right building blocks to make their brand decent. They just have to continue to follow that trend and not go right. Just keep going straight, So, good for Bellator, good for Chael Sonnen, and Chael is back. The American Gangster is back. I anticipate he'll fight Vanderlei Silva, Tito Ortiz, and maybe even Rory McDonald. Take care, guys. Thank you for listening to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you for listening. Tune in as I break more MMA, NFL, and Major League Baseball storylines as the seasons go on. Take care.